Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to go over how to model an Airstream trailer. This might be useful for your projects. It's fairly straightforward, but there are a couple of tricky spots, so I thought I would go over how you might get started modeling something like this. I'm using I think this is called the classic trailer, and I'll show you where to find information and some of the techniques that will be useful for modeling this. First of all, let's talk about where we'll land with this tutorial. By the end, you should be able to make a very clean shell of a trailer of your choosing. And you can see that this isn't fully resolved yet. I just wanted to go over the tricky things, but this is a very clean and fairly accurate representation of an Airstream trailer. And the basic things to understand are this. You need a profile for the ends, and you need a profile for the body. And the trickiest moments are blending between those two profiles. And some techniques that you might not be familiar with, and let's just talk about that. One is, let's see, there are, oops, I hit it. So let's go to the top view. There is a command called blend curve and a command called blend surface, and both of these are really useful. So most of you know the fillet command, and the fillet is really useful for specifying a radius, say 2 feet, and then filleting between two curves. Great. But there's also a related command called blend curve, and blend curve is nice because we can ensure tangency. Here's the dialog box that pops up. We can ensure tangency, and we have these different options. So if we want to blend between these curves, we can do position, we can do tangency, which is the most gentle curve that we can get between these two lines, while also maintaining tangency. And what this means is that as the curve arrives at the line that you're trying to blend to, it's going to come in at this moment, basically in alignment with that curve or tangent to that curve. And you can also get these handles here that allow you to blend the curves, or I mean to adjust the blend while also maintaining tangency. And then there are these other moments. So curvature, for example, G3 and G4, these give you different tightnesses of curvature while still maintaining tangency to the original curves. And this can be really, really useful. It's just an alternative to fillet. And then, of course, we also have the related blend surface. And this is really useful, and not all of our students know about this. So let's talk about blend. So the first one was blend curve. Now we want to do blend surf. And we need to pick corresponding edges here. But this allows us, and we get the same options here of tangency will give us the most gentle curve, and then you get these tighter curves with G3, G4, and curvature. So, but you can see that it's lofting almost between these two curves, and also giving us some handles so that we could adjust the curvature. So that's a really, really useful tool. If we want to, so just one to be aware of when you're modeling, because it's useful in all sorts of situations. The other thing to be aware of, though, with this curve or with this tool is that if you pick edges that are maybe not the ones that you want, you can get, like, so these are a little bit further away. It's changing how it gets blended. So, and that still maybe looks okay in this case, but sometimes you get surfaces which are completely like sort of wrapping around themselves in undesirable ways. So this is the blend surface, and this is going to be very useful for our modeling exercise. Okay, so now let's go to the basic setup. So this is a situation where we are going to start with some reference images. So let me go back to the top view. and find our images here. Okay, so I haven't found perfect technical documentation of Airstream trailers yet. They seem to be a little bit inconsistent, but there is enough available that we can get a pretty accurate model of a trailer. And so what we want to do is now show you where you can find these images. And so as a first step, let me just show you where to find the images. All right, so if we go to the Airstream website, if you just Google Airstream, you're going to find the splash page. And here are the current models that you might want to consider for your project for the dwelling prototype phase, or just to have as reference imagery in your final project. And we can click on these. The one that I modeled was the classic. It seems to be the biggest one, but you can probably find information for these smaller ones. Even these somewhat elevational photographs can be very, very helpful. You could probably do what I'm doing with photographs if you need to. Might be a little bit less accurate. You can see that the plans are in perspective, and that's a little bit tricky, but it's something that we can work with. But we don't really have any elevations or drawings here. So what I have found is that there's also a spot on the website, which I didn't find through the main website page, but just Googling around, I found airstream.com /owners/manuals. And this is where you can find manuals and then also parts books for these different trailers. So if we go to the 2026 Bambi, for example, which is the smallest one, we can look at the owner's manual and see what we have to offer. What does this have to offer? Let's just scroll down here. We should get to some basic information. Airstream. Okay, so the Bambi comes in different lengths, so that's something to be aware of. But we can use these, even though they're not perfect. We can zoom in and do a screen capture of these to get the floor plan. And let's go back to this. There are then also the measurements of the trailer. So this can be useful just to make sure that you're scaling things the right way, and like different models will have different variations. But this is going to help us to know that we are in the ballpark of the overall real world size of these things. Then as we scroll down, we're going to find some drawings eventually. No, so we're not getting any like really great drawings in this. So this is where we would want to go back and look at the Bambi parts book. So let's view that. Okay, and the parts books for the models tend to have better drawings. So first of all, you're going to see these really, really great 3D diagrams, which unfortunately are less helpful. I mean, they're great for understanding how these things should look and something about the construction of them, but they're not so great for generating our digital models. And this is a case where it's better to have drawings like this. So this would be a really useful elevation. Unfortunately, what I'm finding is not all of the parts books have, for example, so this is with the plan and this elevation, we can get pretty far, but it would also be really, really helpful to have a like a front or rear elevation. And scrolling through here, I'm not finding that. I'm getting lots of great information about how it's constructed. I found this other site called woodlandairstreamparts.com, and then if you go to this, the woodlandairstreamparts.com collections Airstream body, I started noticing that, let's see here, if we start scrolling through this, I started seeing these additional elevations, which are really necessary for the modeling exercise that we want to do. And so in this case, we can see that this is the 2020 classic exterior shell. And I thought, oh, do they have some sort of special access? And what I realized is that I think that they are grabbing these images from parts books which actually have these drawings. And so this could be like a really good way to help you find which ones, which parts books on the website have additional drawings. So if we go back to the blog here and then search by year, so 2020, and we go to the classic, the owner's manual, so we can view that. And let's see here, the classic again. So we have the floor plan drawings here in the manual, and then all of the dimensions. And then let's go to back and go to 2 here, and then I have the parts book for the classic for that year, and let's view that. And there are the useful drawings. So this is where I'm grabbing the drawings from, and then you can just, you know, Shift Control S, like grab a screenshot of this and save it somewhere in your computer, which we can then bring into our Rhino model. All right, and then we have also these really excellent elevation drawings. And so I'm not sure, it could just be the case that the older models, like slightly older models, tend to have these elevational views, and the newer models now have more 3D views. I'm guessing that the shape of these things hasn't changed too much, and that you could probably also use information from one Airstream trailer. There's probably a kind of standard, I don't know, maybe the heights are fairly standard, although I haven't confirmed this. What's also interesting here is that you can go all the way back to like the 60s and 70s and see manuals for like say a 1968 Airstream. And these are kind of fun to look at because they have old school images here. These are all photographs. Oh, there's some sort of fun diagrams here about parking. I went back to, let's see, you can go all the way back to the early 60s. So if you look at like 1965, and you can see these different ones. They're kind of fun. Some of the photographs are fun. So yeah, things like this. More simple drawings, straightforward drawings, and cool old photographs. Okay, so, but now that we have located an Airstream that has some information, so between the parts book and the manual, we can get the drawings that we need, and then we can bring these into Rhino. And if you haven't done this before, let me just go to the folder where I have this, Show in File Explorer. Okay, so I have all of these drawings, screenshots saved, and then you can just drag and drop these into Rhino. And you want to bring it in as a picture, and then you can just draw it out on your screen. Okay, so once you have all of this stuff, and you're not going to find perfect alignment between these things, but let's look, show these things, the lines, some older ones. Let me hide this stuff. So the good thing about the trailer is that it's symmetrical, right? So you really only need to model half of it. That's a good way to think about it. And also because some of the drawings are a little bit tricky, like this plan drawing, we don't actually get all the way to the bottom of the footprint. And there are furnishings and things like that. It's also in perspective, and I don't think it's even perfectly in the center point of the thing. We have to make a little bit, we have to make some assumptions here, right? So this is a 30-foot classic. I didn't do this super rigorously. I didn't refer to the manual, but you can see here in the distance, with the distance, this is now 35 feet, but I was thinking actually down here, because it's in perspective, that like this is going to be the 30-foot dimension. So between those two lines are 30, and even that's not at the bottom of the trailer. We're kind of grabbing these curves from the top, but it's most important just to get started somewhere, and then you can kind of massage the lines that you make into the right shape. So again, you want to bring in your images, and then if I unlock this right, like you just kind of bring in your image randomly, and it's going to be some sort of shape, right? And then I like to put all of the images on a layer so that I can toggle them on and off. And I like to put all of the lines on a layer and make that a bright color like red, which really stand out against the image. Okay, so then let's say if we're saying that this is the part that we're going to call 30 feet, I'm going to bring that over to there-ish, oops, to the top view. And then we're going to offset this 30 feet. 30 feet over here, and then we're going to bring this over and find the roughly corresponding part. So let's say there, and then we're going to scale this thing, and we'll pick that point, oops, scale, not 1D, this point and this point, and we'll bring that up, okay, to the right size. All right, so now that I have that, I've tried to locate a center line, and I'm not tracing the image as much as I'm constructing things a bit. And so the inner area here, right, let's see here. This seemed to be the closest to the ground, and what I'm really concerned about is getting that curve. And so, again, I start with this curve, and then I change it a little bit. But I'm going to find what I don't know, what we're going to call like the midpoint. So let me just do this part again. Just so you understand how I did it, because I think it's important to get this kind of thing right. So let's say I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to draw an interp curve. And some sort of grid snap-on, which I don't want. And then I'm holding down on Shift, and I'm just tracing this curve like that. Okay. So now I wouldn't want to trace this 4 times because I know that it's the same, right? So what I really want to do is let's mirror it. So actually, if we have the outer boundary here and the outer boundary here, I'm going to put that along the edge, even though this is not like our 30-foot mark. But that is going to establish at least a boundary, which we can use as a midpoint. So then I can grab this line and mirror it. Find the midpoint, mirror it like that. Because obviously this is in a different place because it's a couch and not this countertop, but at least we're going from this overall boundary. And then we can draw a line here, like that. Right. And then similarly, we want to find a line here that we can use to, so let's do this and copy this line. So at least we're looking at the outer edges of everything. And then let's get a midpoint here. So let's draw a line there, get this, and then mirror it like this midpoint. Okay. Bump, bump, bump. And this is going to be the basic footprint of our Airstream trailer. Okay. And then using this, I've brought in also the elevations and thinking about, okay, where's the, this isn't perfect, right? But I'm kind of seeing like, where's the outer boundary of that, even though it should probably be down here, but we can modify all of this a little bit as we build the 3D model if we want. So let's just keep going through the basic steps. And similarly here, I brought this over and you can see that I didn't do a great job because this is quite a bit bigger. So we just have to scale it down. So let's bring this up and I'll bring it down actually. So like that. So that's going to be our basic footprint of the trailer. What we might want to do, because you notice this is where like we can see that things aren't coming in a tangent way, which is like my interp curves aren't perfect. So this is where I might actually want to go and replace these things with a blend curve. And let me go on a different layer, maybe default, just so I can see the difference between the curves. I'm using, again, blend curve. Let's use tangency. We could look at curvature. No, that's just getting tighter, so tangency is good. And then I want to sort of adjust these handles so that the curve is as close as it can be to that curve that I traced, but it doesn't, it's not going to be perfect, and that's okay. It's just going to be like close enough. Oops, let me do that again. Okay, tangency is good, and then I'm just tweaking the handles to try to find something that's more or less that curvature. Okay, great. So now I have that. And you can see now that this is, let's move this to this layer. Okay, and you can see that we're coming in a tangent way. We don't get any weird bubbling or at the end. So you can see that there's a kink here, basically, with the one that's wasn't using blend curve, and now there's no kink here. It's coming in very seamlessly. So we're just going to replace all of these curves, just using mirror, that, and then mirror. And we get that. Okay, perfect. So we can keep that as our footprint. And so now I want to come here, and so I want to trace these lines, trace this thing. So I've rotated. I just want to show you how I set this up. I originally tried following all of the seams, or like breaking up my curves with all of the seams here. That ended up not being the best approach. So I would say what worked well was to identify where the top of the whole Airstream coincides with a panel and maintain that. And then maybe draw the rest of the sides as like a single curve, or you can draw it however you want, and then you can join these curves and rebuild them to be one curve. So what I mean by that is I've drawn these as like several separate curves, and you can see I had this little sliver here also as a separate curve. But you may end up rebuilding these curves anyway on the fly, so you would just join that and just rebuild this curve and look at the, here we are. Let's increase this to, I don't know, something like 20, and it's really tightly following the curve. And then we have one curve that we can't explode. So that worked pretty well. And then again, this whole process was just using, again, this interp curve and drawing this out here, just making sure that I had like a good curve here, and then kind of adjusting that to the top. Okay, so again, I'm establishing a center line and then drawing it on one side. This one's a little bit different because you want this curve to go across the middle of the thing. So the trick to that is just to put a point. To establish your center line, put your point on one side, and delete the point over here and delete that point and all this stuff. And I basically just mirrored this point, and that way I knew where to put it so that everything would be symmetrical on both sides. So then I'm drawing this line between those two sides, and then I'm just constructing one side and then mirroring it on the other side. Okay, so once we have this profile curve, so I've just put it back down here, and I'll just use the curves that I made, even though they're not perfect, because this can just show you how this works. And I'm bringing this over. Again, I'm going to find my midpoint here, and bounding box is just going to put something around that, and I'm going to find my midpoint here. And you can see that I wasn't drawing this very carefully, and so these things are not like matched up. I don't want to modify the height too much, so let's just turn on the points here. I think what I would do in this case, what do I want to do? Let's just bounding box, maybe scale 1D would be the best, to something like that. And actually I want to scale from this point since it has a bulge like that. So we just scaled 1D, and now we have this center profile. And I also did the same thing here, drawing the profile here. You can see there's a flat line here, and then curves, and then another flat line up here. So we're just going to use that. And so we're going to grab that profile and bring it down here. Okay, so now let's jump into perspective. Zoom in on that. Okay, so this one, let's under rotate, if we right click, it's rotate 3D, and we'll tilt this up. And same with this one, rotate 3D, establish our axis this way, and rotate that up. Okay, cool. So to get started, just to visualize this thing, let's go ahead and take these lines and extrude them. And I'm extruding in both sides, and I'm finding, oops, I didn't put that really in the midpoint. So let's put this in the midpoint of this thing, extruding to both sides and finding the moment where we hit a curve over here, right? And you can see that I have multiple surfaces here because, I'm turning the ISO curves off, because of the way that I drew my curves originally. Now I'm going to fix this in a moment. The one that's really important is the top panel. The top's going to remain the top. And then I'm going to do the same thing here with this guy. Let's extrude it both sides. Okay, and this gives us the basic shape here, but we can see, oops, this is not right. So let's fix that. And again, it might be important to go back to the original dimensions in the manual to make sure that like our overall volume is right, but this is focusing on the tricky surface modeling. So I'm now going to, what am I going to do? I'm going to scale, oops, scale 1D. And I just want to bring this up to like that. Should be fine for this tutorial. Okay, so now I'm going to extrude this curve again on both sides. I'm going to go to that moment. Okay, so now we have this kind of basic outline, but you can see that things aren't like really matching up so great here. So this is not going to work for us. And this is where we can, you know, looking at the thing, see that if we look at photographs, I've closed them all down, but if we look at the photographs, we know that the, oh, I have, what I can do is look at the manual, right? And we're going to see that, you know, this is kind of curving down here, right? So we have double curvature here that we need to create. And this is where blend surface is going to work out really well. So I'm actually just going to delete these curves because they got us apart so far. The windshield is flat, so that's great. We can work with that. And we can use blend surface. Now I'm going to adjust this a little bit just based on my previous experience and doing this model. And I'm going to scale this so that this panel matches up here, the roof panel. I think that's going to work out a little bit better for us. And then I'm going to use blend surf. And here and here. And so I get the first surface, which is blending between those surfaces. Now, this is where I can show you that you have to be careful where you pick. So, because if I pick here and here, I'm getting this like weird twisted surface, which I don't want. But I'm just going to use blend surface, and I can use go from here to here, and that gives us surface 1. Okay. Now, this is great for showing us a kind of basic footprint of the Airstream, but it's also the case, and we do have this other like panel with single curvature here, and we're going to use blend surface again, blend surf. But you can see here that like that's gonna, oops, give us weird results, right? So this is where we have to start strategically cutting our curve up. And this is where it wasn't like so helpful that I drew this curve in multiple pieces. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to rebuild this curve. So let's select all of those 3 curves. I'm going to join them, and then I'm going to rebuild them. Rebuild that curve as like, I don't know, some higher number, like 20 should be fine. And now you'll see that I can't explode this curve, and that's important. Now I'm going to extrude this curve on both sides. I'm going to, and it looks like the one over here, right? It's just one that's, it's just one surface now. Okay, so I'm still going to run into the same problem here. If I do that, right? This could be useful later, so I'm going to go ahead and just replace, oops. Let's replace these curves over here with that and that. And let's mirror this over. So we just have a clean one that we're not going to cut up. But what I discovered is that now that, like, the best way to understand where to introduce seams in our model for using blend surface is by looking at the front panel, right? And looking at the way that we have this like these 3 zones. So we have the windshield zone, the top, and then the bottom. And this zone is mostly reflected in the side elevation as well. We have this, I think this is what they call the rub rail. And although I'm not sure about that, we could look in the manual, but we do have this division here, this line, which coincides with the windshield. And then things don't align. It's kind of hard to see what's going on because this is the awning that can fold down. But we can kind of figure this out. Like, I think what's useful is maybe just to introduce another division here, and then we can work out the model from that. So let's go back to the perspective view. And so what we're going to do first is I'm going to use a, let's see, surface here, and then I want just this rectangular plane. And I'm going to put a surface here, and I'm just going to copy that up to the top of the windshield here. And I'm going to use that to split this. So I want to split the surface, and then I'm going to split it with those 2 planes. Great. Okay, let's turn off the ISO surfaces here just so we don't get confused. And so like this is going to be that sort of rub rail zone and then the windshield zone, and then we have the top. So now that we have this, we can use blend surf. And we can, now you'll see that this is not perfect with the curve that we had, and that's fine. We could begin to adjust this if we wanted to make it closer, or we could just accept what it is. I'm going to see if we tweak it a little bit. It'd be better if I were looking in the plan view, but let's just say we tweak that a little bit, or we just keep things simple and say like that's what it's going to be, even though it's not perfect, because we know that our drawing probably wasn't perfect to begin with. So that's going to be close enough. Then we can use that command again, here and here. And then we can use that command again, here and here. I think that's the way that I did it before. We can experiment with this a little bit. We can also do here blend between this one and this one. That's what I did before. I like that better. It just looks a little cleaner to me. You can experiment with this. Once you have this, maybe you decide, okay, what happens if I blend surface between this one and this one? Maybe you like, maybe that's cleaner. Okay, but there is something important to notice here, which is that when I use the blend surface here, it didn't perfectly match that curve. And so that what that means is that while I can join all of these guys like that, I can't, like I could join all of these guys like that. but I can't now join. Well, it's joining it, but it's not closing up the seam here. So that's not good. So what this is telling me is that I actually need to, let's just isolate this for a minute. Duplicate the border, hide that. Let's explode this. We need to rebuild our sidewalls so that it's going to match our. So I just grabbed that profile, which is now going to be the new profile, which is pretty close to the original one that we drew, but it's not exactly the same as this curve. Now, the other thing, let's just see what happens if I extrude this. And does it explode into multiples? No, it's not exploding into multiple surfaces. So that's good. So it's a single surface. So in this case, I could just extrude that and then scale 1D. And I'm bringing this all the way down to there. This is no longer our correct profile curve, and that surface is no longer correct. And if we turn off the isosurface, we still get this really clean model. And now we can use that to mirror over here, like that. And we can mirror those guys over, like that. And we can then take this whole, let's delete these curves. We can, oops. We can now join all of this stuff together, like that. And mirror this on the other side. Okay, so now let's just take, let's select the curves, hide all of these curves, Control H. Don't really need that point anymore. Let's join this all together. And now, there we go. We have this very clean trailer. Now what we could also do here is, because we know from our elevation that we're going to have this line through the whole thing. This is where we could go back. And maybe we do this as with a copy of it, just so we have that basic form that's really nice. And we could take these guys and we could, again, with our rectangular plane, move this out, move this over, take this guy and split it like this. And we get that. We could choose to split it up here, but there's not really a line up here. This is where you can also see that my surfaces are not matching. If we go to the drawings, right? They're not matching the actual, like the seams of my digital model are not matching the seams of our actual artifact. This is where we could go back and I think split our curves if we wanted to get those seams. I didn't go so far as to experiment, but I think it's pretty easy to see how, like, once we have, and we just need to do it with, like, you know, one of these things. But we could begin to, let's see if we think that this line is kind of coming from here down. Let's move that over or something like that. Maybe cutting across these seams, or maybe just going to here. But the idea is that we would essentially like grab this curve, like extrude it up, right? And then we could take these things and split them with that. And basically get the curve that we wanted, even though they're not, like we would join that thing together, we would join that thing together. It's maybe a little unsatisfying because the topology of the digital model doesn't match 100% this thing, but maybe from this we could then rebuild surfaces, which are, like, we could probably actually then, like, once we have that, right, we could go ahead and mirror this, and then we could loft. Now, if we duplicated, we could duplicate the border, and then we would rebuild that curve and rebuild that curve over. We would rebuild that curve, mirror it. So I'll just do that. Do border, oops, oh, it's okay. We have a copy, explode that, grab that, rebuild it, some really high number, 20 is fine. Then we would hide that guy. We would mirror this like that. And we would loft those two, right? And then we'd get that shape, which is, oops, I had the, where is it? Which is that one there, right? And then we could experiment with, like, could we blend surf? I have no idea how this will work. We don't have a surface to blend, but I think if we went through that whole process and started doing that, or we could even try like sweeping, we could grip the curve, but maybe if we, I don't know, let's try this. Blend surf, we'd actually really need a surface from here. But, you know, you could begin experimenting with this to try to generate that more precisely. Okay. All right, and then even though these windshields aren't perfectly, like, we would want to come back and like actually project curves, and because we can see from our windows that these don't go all the way around and are filleted, but to get all of these windows, we would just like tilt up this elevation. We would draw these windows, we would tilt up the elevation, use project curve to project them onto this, or extrude them and extrude them through and slice out our windows. So that should be pretty familiar to all of you. And then I'm just putting these, just to show you how close we are to having a clean model, I'm putting these on a window layer that just has a custom material with a bit of transparency, so that when I go to, say, my technical view, I'm seeing those clearly. And everything but the window, let's lock those for a minute. Let's like, oops, don't want that. Grab that, join everything but the window, unlock that. You could select the windows, select those things, join those. All right, and we have a pretty good representation here. If we want to see, depending on how you do the border of these things, oops, nope, let's extract wireframe, group those curves, and just the way I have my technical view set up, I get these darker lines where the curves are. So that's nice. If we go to our monochrome view, and we also get a nice clean shell. What else could you do with this? Just one other thing that might be useful. So here you can see some of my failed attempts earlier, which didn't work out, where I was trying to follow the logic of the thing. And you can see here that the curvature, those earlier attempts, it just wasn't maintaining tangency where it was coming in. So it's a subtle difference, but over here you can see that we just get this nice rounded shape everywhere. So this was basically the version that I did. Walked through. Now let me show you one more thing that you could do with this. So there are different geometry types in Rhino, and this is a NURBS model, but we could also, if we want the base, now we have this capet, right? We could start offsetting it, experimenting with offsetting it to get the interior. We could also turn this into a sub-D model, which would give us different options for modeling with this basic form. And we can do this with quad remesh, this great command. I experimented with different amounts. 500 by default, it will have the use surface edges off. And then you'll get, if we do a preview and hide the input objects, you're going to see we're getting messier topology. It's not following the lines of our surface as much. We can use strict here. And now you can see that we have things which are following the lines. Let's turn our input objects. These things are really following the lines much better. But you can see here we don't have any surface lines to follow. So this is where we might want to go ahead and put like another plane here. Something like that. Let's split this object with this here. And if we wanted to, we could split it at the midpoint here, but let's just keep it simple for now. Now we could use our quad remesh and strict 500. And let's just grab our mesh. Okay, so oops, looks like it didn't join things up here. That's maybe our surfaces aren't perfectly joined there. That's weird. Let's try to let's see, what do we weld vertices? That didn't fix it either. That's really weird. I'm not sure why that's happening. Let's just see if we can, if we join those things, they join. Try joining all of these things just to make sure that everything's cool. Dupe border, not finding any borders in there. Now let's join everything else. Dupe border, only finding that bottom border, that's great. Quad remesh, strict, okay. Still finding, let's try one more thing. Quad remesh and strict detect hard edges, convert it. Oh, and then we could also convert it to a sub-D, so that saves a step. So let's try that. Still finding those weird edges, which I didn't have before. I think that with a little bit of effort, I could solve that, but I don't want to get bogged down in the tutorial. But let's go back to a moment before those things where I split that up there just to show you a cleaner model. Okay, so that's before. So this thing is all together. Let's do the quad remesh. 500, convert to sub-D, detect hard edges. Okay, thing like that. Okay, and now I have my sub-D model, which is pretty clean. And if I hit tab, you can see that I get the faceted view, and then I get this view. The smooth view if I hit tab. And then the nice thing about this is that it just opens up different ways of modeling with the surface. We can, for example, we could do extrude sub-D, and we could kind of pull this out. Let's see here. It's a little bit like that. Let's just go out like, I don't know, 6 inches. Oops. Try that again. Extrude curve. Let's say we wanted to make a weird bumper around this thing. Extrude sub-D. And then do that. Enter. Extrude sub-D. Okay. So let's set a base point like here, and then kind of pull it out like that. It's a little tricky, but we can pull it out like that. Let's now try like, I don't know, like 8 inches. Did it go in or out? Didn't work. Okay. I did this before. Set base point. Let's try that. And then we could pull, okay. Now it looks like I'm going up and I'm, okay, yeah, if I'm here close to the base point and going up, I'm pushing this out like that. Okay, cool. So like that. And go back to the tab view. You see I've got something like this, and that I could begin to use the sub-D tools of like scaling that object, make sure it's set to world. I could then bevel this edge, bevel, something like that. It's about 6 inches. Too much. I'm just double shift control and double left clicking. Bevel. Let's say like, let's do 3 inches, something like that. Bevel, 3 inches, something like that. Okay, cool. And now you can see when I get that, I get something like that. And then I could just make a copy of this. So if I want to put this around my original object, I could delete that. Oops, I deleted too much. Let's go to the right view. Delete that. Looks like I didn't get oh, that's where, right. Could have been a little more perfect there, but this is good enough for what I want to show you. We could tab, like bring that over, and we could kind of put this around our original one, and we could also then convert it back if we wanted to a NURBS drawing. Subdy tools, and we could convert object to NURBS. And then let's find, is that the NURBS one? Okay, yeah. Now I have my NURBS object, which I could then, work with all of the NURBS tools, and I could position this much more precisely in relation and maybe trim it out with the original surface or something like that. And this looks like in something like that. Not sure that we want to do that, but it's just to show you that you can go between these two different geometry types pretty seamlessly in Rhino 8. All right, so hopefully this is going to be useful for modeling your Airstream. The other thing is that we have these really great drawings, so you can redraw things. It should be very easy to draw plans and sections from the documentation that you can find in the manuals and parts books online. So thanks so much and have fun.